Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. At the outset, I want to clarify something that I said in an hangout with Professor RV about the relationship between the sound of Om and the Sri Chakra. I would like you, and I'm going to put the link to a Sound of Sun, a NASA video that actually captures the sound. And if you listen to that, you will see that it sounds like Om. And when the Om is put on a tonoscope, that's when you get the Sri Chakra symbol. Now, these are scientific things because these are observations of science. That's what I meant. If I meant, and where Sanatana Dharma ties with this is the belief that we say Yat Pinde Tat Brahmande. This was explained in detail in an earlier hangout with Professor Subhash Kak. I'd urge our viewers to read that. But I'm sorry for this detailed explanation. Today's guest is Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma, and he has some very grave news from United Kingdom. Pandit ji, welcome to PGurus channel.
Namaste, ji, and good afternoon and namaskar to all of the viewers. My apologies for being absent for the last few weeks, but as the conversation progresses, I think people will become familiar with the seriousness of events here in the UK and will excuse the absence.
Well, Pandit ji, first off, I hear that the United Kingdom Parliament has been closed as of today, and it's going to be reopening only on the 21st of April. And also I'm also hearing some rumblings about a rather high rate of mortality amongst people who are British Indian, British South Asian, British Pakistani, British, various communities. So what information do you have to share with us, sir?
Yes, I can confirm what you've said. Parliament normally closes for a short period for the Easter recess, and Easter is upon us. But this year, there has been a lot of concern about so many people gathered into the Houses of Parliament and conducting business as usual. Parliament is not the most spacious of places. As you've seen, it's an ancient building, and you can probably see it here behind me.
Yes.
When it was constructed, it was never constructed with the intention of allowing people to have 2-meter spaces around them. So there have been very, very serious concerns for all of the people who are working within Parliament. And so the decision's been taken that as the country is now on lockdown, with essential services only, to be perfectly honest, it seemed to make sense to shut down the whole parliamentary paraphernalia as well, and probably even extend it a little bit longer than it would ordinarily have been. Now, with regard to what you were saying about grave concerns, this is true. This coronavirus is something that we've been potentially anticipating for quite some time, because as in our Shastra, it teaches that somebody who gets stuck in Kam and Arth, the first of the two Purusharth, is destined for suffering. Because what happens is that if you exhaust the body's energy and resources, Pran Shakti, by fully committing yourself to the pursuit of Kam and Arth, then the body it lacks harmony, it becomes imbalanced, and the level of Pran Shakti diminishes. And when the level of Pran Shakti diminishes, a person becomes vulnerable to illness and suffering. And the immune system is something that gets very rapidly compromised when the body is struggling just to maintain itself and to maintain its energy systems in the other parts of your activities. So when you have one person doing that, you can teach them how to come out of Kam and Arth. But when you have a whole community, a society, a nation, if you have what would be called a civilization, but an ethos of how to live on this planet, which is as stuck in Kam and Arth for a long period of time, then the people in that community periodically are going to have dips in the quality of their immune system to resist the conventional viruses, the bacteria, the fungal spores that surround us all the time. So those of us who observe these things have been concerned for a long time that as people's immune systems become compromised, it's inevitable that as a species we become vulnerable to these. Now, this particular coronavirus, it seems, is very intelligent in its direct capacity, one, to be transmitted, and two, to be very, very destructive with people who are compromised in their immune systems. And there are some aspects of the way in which our Sanatani community exists which give us a great deal of cause for celebration. You will have seen that everybody is now doing namaste around the world, and a huge shift is occurring away from eating meat and going to pure vegetarians diets. We're also seeing that people are adopting what they call social distancing. Now, I'll make a remark on this. A long time ago, when the evangelicals came to India, they spread a noise. So they made a noise and spread a rumor that the educated people, the Brahmin caste, as they pigeonholed everybody, were so arrogant that if somebody of a lower caste were to cast their shadow upon this person, then that lower caste person would be punished. Now, if you put your mind into the space at that time in India, our culture had accommodated the notion that people who are working with flesh, dead bodies, etc., they're working with pathogens, they're working with viruses and bacteria. And so an easy way of ensuring a degree of social distancing would be to say, right, everybody keep your shadows away from each other. That way you can at least ensure that there is some degree of distancing. And a lot of things like this are now becoming commonplace. One of the other remarkable things is I saw an advert being circulated very heavily, in fact several adverts now, where they're recommending that toilet paper is not the right way in which one should properly wash oneself. So we're having a herd movement towards adopting many of our traditional practices. As you know, in traditional Brahmin families, they would eat with the right hand and the right hand alone, and use the left hand for doing anything which was unclean, whether it would be picking something up or other activities which were associated with not hygiene. So we have in our culture many of these things which are actually very beneficial and will help to preserve our community. One of the things yoga sadhaks will know is that if you eat meat, then the body's prana requirement for digesting that meat is quite dramatic. It really does need to exert a lot of energy to break down that substance. Whereas those who don't eat meat have that prana shakti available then to distribute amongst other more important systems in the body. So all of these changes are occurring, and they're good. And they will hopefully help our community if we can maintain our shuddhi practices to avoid the risk of infection through contact and through food habits. But there are one or two aspects which are causing us a bit of concern, and I'll turn to those in a moment. You were going to ask something?
Yes, sir. What I was going to draw your attention to was that in the United Kingdom, they were finding that there was a much higher incidence of the coronavirus in some clusters. I guess this is leading up to your next answer. So perhaps you can
Yes,
throw some light on what you've been
yes.
observing.
Yes, so I was just going to close on that first part with the remark that, you know, we have, I grew up and my mum used to say to me, "Beta, never eat anything which is juta," this
Mm,
concept of jut,
mm,
right? Which is that if somebody else has contacted the food
right.
or there's any possibility of saliva having touched the food, then you mustn't eat it. And I remember struggling, telling many of my university friends that actually if they ate something of my plate, I wouldn't eat it, or I
Right.
wouldn't share any dishes. I was a vegetarian in those days, and so I'd get lovely food, which was better than the majority of the mass cooking that everybody would get. And that concept has been hard to explain, but now all of a sudden, everybody is instinctively and genuinely understanding that there is a need for maintaining these boundaries. So they're all good practices. But one thing that only today I have become aware of, and so I'm still working through the data, is that there have been certain spikes in the mortality rate within certain parts of the country. And it's only by drilling down that you begin to notice some aberrations. Now, it's looking to me, and I don't want anybody to accept this as gospel yet, because as I say, the data I've only had a glance at today, but it's looking to me as though areas in which ethnic communities are gathered in large numbers, then in those areas there is a spike in the mortality rate of elders, people over the age of 80. And it looks, on the basis of the data, it may even be 200%. So we're losing potentially double the number of our elders in our communities than the non-ethnic communities. Now, this is not just to do with the Hindu community. but the Turkish community and the Muslim community, Pakistani community as well, because I think of the manner in which we have joint families. So we have in one small group potentially three generations, grandparents, parents, and indeed youngsters living. And it's all very well self-isolating within a family unit. But I would strongly recommend that our community needs to perhaps look at ways in which we can self-isolate the elders within our community family units even more. So much so that the notion of shared bathrooms, um, perhaps cleaning the bathrooms after somebody has used it and prior to the elders using it, um, making sure that they are perhaps, I know this is a really tough one, but making sure that they are perhaps keeping a distance from the youngest members. The youngest members, especially children, teenagers, etc., they're more robust and they may be going out, they may be involved in supporting the critical services, doing voluntary work, etc., etc. But what we're wanting to now avoid is that when they come back into our shared family environments, that there is that extra level of concern over protecting our elders. One thing I'd noticed, and this is probably quite a dramatic statement, and ordinarily I wouldn't want to put fear into people's minds, but I think at this moment in time, caution is the watchword. And that is that potentially a worst case scenario is that elders who are over the age of 80, we could be looking at losing a huge percentage of our eldest generation. And it would be such a tragedy if that were to happen, purely and solely because we weren't smart enough, we weren't intelligent enough, we weren't disciplined enough to be able to do what's necessary to deal with this particular virus. And so many of our traditions we're going to have to revisit.
Well, this is really really hard to bear, and I noticed that when I was visiting United Kingdom, the closeness of the generations. Because in the United States, it's more like because it's only first generation for the most part, so you don't see quite the clustering of generations that you see in the United Kingdom, and this rather comes as a shock. And I think the three generations, if you just generalize it, the middle generation has its work cut out. They have to be the buffers. They probably should stay at home and make sure that the elders are comfortable. At the same time, the younger generation, it is responsibility, it is their duty, I guess. I mean, we're just recommending this, that they perhaps deal with the distribution of food or any other services, doing the errands and so on and so forth, and thereby not allow the older generation to do this, because they are really really vulnerable to this, and it's very
If,
very. Yeah, go ahead,
sorry,
please go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, if anybody has any second thoughts about this, it's part of our tradition that sampradayas, that our practices are perfectly adaptable and flexible to the situation in order to ensure that suffering is diminished and loss of life is absolutely minimized. And so we should be able to be adaptable enough to accommodate whatever circumstances are presented and make sure that we protect all of the three generations. Now, you mentioned a possible division of labor, but there is another scenario which springs to mind. We have had a fantastic response from our community over the last 2 weeks. I know that the way our Hindu community works, and other Indian communities also, is that we rise to the challenge of a catastrophe or a natural disaster. And I know up and down the country, restaurants have closed their shops, but what they've said is, let's use our kitchens to cook for those elderly and vulnerable people who perhaps are not being able to get out and do shopping and look after themselves. So we've had a phenomenal response in that. But there is one thing which is worrying, and that is that sometimes when passion for seva overcomes cold, hard, intellectual, disciplined understanding, on occasion, we can actually make the problem worse. And so what you have just highlighted, I think, is something that everybody should think about. So when we have a scenario where we have lots of elders perhaps living on their own, then the people who should be going to take food to them should not be other people who are in a vulnerable category. And so as the ages, as you get from the youngsters who are less than 25, then 25 to 50, then 50 to 75, and 75 onwards, we shouldn't be seeing retired people who are 60 years old ferrying food to other vulnerable people. suddenly you've multiplied the capacity for that transmission to occur amongst a vulnerable group. It would be far more preferable if we had the youngsters, as you say, actually distributing the food very, very carefully and making sure transmission is minimized. And that middle generation, and especially the more vulnerable people who want to do seva, perhaps their seva would be more appreciated and make a larger contribution if they were filling shelves in the local supermarket. And the government has asked for 250,000 volunteers to help to support the non-frontline services in the National Health Service. And so people could be involved in those areas as well. But people need to really sit back and think and reflect upon their actions. We certainly need light to guide us in what to do, and perhaps not so much heat of passion that we have to get 100,000 boxes out to 20,000 homes ASAP. We need to be a bit more intellectual and intelligent about how we do this. And so there are thoughts there. I shall be publishing some recommendations on my website and on other websites where I have a degree of exposure. And so if people want to keep up with what's going on in the latest news, then certainly I'd be really grateful if you could suggest they follow my accounts.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we will do that. And in summary, these are tough times. I think we all need to come together as a community, understand our strengths and our weaknesses, and work within those. And I think that will mean that a lot of people who we might lose otherwise can still be around us and be that source of strength for all of us. Is there anything else you would like to add, Satishji?
There's one other issue which is of great concern, and that is that when a person, an elder, goes into hospital having been found to be positive in their testing for coronavirus, they enter a period of isolation. And in the tragic cases, more of which we're seeing on a more frequent basis, when they pass away, they haven't had any contact with the other members of the family. And so more often than not, the hospital is required to prevent the family from having access to the body. And that is a very traumatic position to be in, when a family loses one of its elders and all of the relationships are severed in such a violent and harsh manner. There is a great deal of trauma to be dealt with. And in our tradition, we have lots of rituals which help us and support us and guide us and educate us, as well as offering guidance for the Atma which is now separated and parted, for it to continue its journey. And if none of that is happening, it causes a great deal of suffering, and we have to address this issue. So one thing I would advise everybody is that if they are in the tragic situation of having lost a dear and loved one, and they're concerned about what rituals should be done to make sure that the passage is as smooth as possible, there are rituals that we have. For example, often in times gone past, we would have soldiers going to fight in a battle, in war. And many times, those soldiers don't come back to us. And for those Atma, we do have practices and rituals which help both the parents, both those who are left behind, but also those who have moved on, to navigate this tragic event. And so myself and a group of us as colleagues, we will be putting out again the information that's needed for people to be able to do the appropriate puja and the appropriate yagyas to ensure that this time of immense difficulty is navigated and that the harm to everybody is diminished. So again, we'll be putting those out on my various websites and Twitter handles, etc. But I would also send out a message to everybody in the scholars community and our Pandits, Purohits, Pujaris to reach out to the communities in whatever manner they safely can and ensure that they're there to provide them with spiritual and pastoral support, so that families at this time have got somebody who they can talk to, who can give them the support and the wisdom and the guidance from our Shastra to minimize the losses. There is a potential that we will be in this situation for a few more months to come, if not even longer. So we need to step up and approach the problems with a great deal of wisdom and a great deal of compassion.
Yes, indeed. I couldn't agree with you more. And viewers, stay home, stay safe, and we'll come back and update you on the situation in the United Kingdom in a few days, as and when things get a little bit more clarity. If we get a better grip on what the situation is on the ground, we will come back to you on that. And thank you very much, Pandit Ji, for sharing your thoughts.
Srihaji, it's been a pleasure. One thing that we desperately need in this time and these sorts of times is amazingly efficient communication infrastructure so that we can share everything we're learning. And the service that Paramatma has required from you in launching the PGurus and using PGurus at this time is a wonderful contribution. And at this time, I'm really confident that the manner in which we can all communicate will actually help in saving lives and reducing suffering. So thank you for your seva. I know that it's purely voluntary and that you yourself are the only person supporting it. And at this time, I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to add their support to you. So thank you for the chance of getting some ideas and words out there with our wider community.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Pranam.
Pranam, namaskar.